So, if you've signed up, you probably know who we all are. Izzy Judd, author, podcast host. Nishma Robb, who is genius marketeer at Google. Michelle Kennedy, who, as you all know, founded Peanut and is the CEO. And me, Pippa, who author, writer, books coming out, sign up. I feel like that, saying that at every child. My publisher goes, just say it all the time. I'm like, all right, then I will. Talking about Mother's Day and why it's often not a very comfortable subject for many people. We all have our reasons. Maybe it's the loss of your own mother or a difficult relationship with your mother, or pregnancy loss, infertility, fertility challenges. I mean, there are so many reasons that people don't connect with Mother's Day. I personally don't and haven't done for a long time. But I'm going to ask each person here about just why they are here on this panel and why it does resonate with them, the subject of Mother's Day triggers. So Izzy, if I can start with you.
Of course, yeah. So it's interesting how with each Mother Day that passes, you have a different feeling towards Mother's Day. Whether that's because your children are getting older and they're becoming more aware of Mother's Day themselves, or for me personally, looking back, I went through a few years of fertility struggles. So there were many days actually that were triggers. Mother's Day was one of them. Just in the sheer fact that it highlighted everything that I wanted so desperately, and it just wasn't happening. So I suppose for me personally, the thing that was particularly difficult, the Mother's Day that was particularly difficult, was after my miscarriage, and feeling that I should have shared that Mother's Day with the baby that we never brought home. But now Mother's Day will be very different. I now have three children, which I can't believe, but my heart always remains close to the person that found it difficult, and for the people that still are triggered by Mother's Day.
And Nishma, I know you also had challenges and other things that have gone on in your life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I agree with you. I think your perception of Mother's Day changes through your life. You know, as a young girl or a woman, I still, actually, funnily, as I was coming over today, my most vivid memory is making, do you know when you used to roll up little bits of tissue paper and stick it? I mean, it's the most dreadful thing ever. But handing that to my mum, it was, a very special moment when I was a child, and just thinking about that. I then had quite a period of time where I didn't have my mum around, and I remember really longing for that and hated Mother's Day because it was just another marker, a reminder of not being there. And then personally, having those years of suppressing that whole kind of, yeah, it's okay, I haven't got kids, and secretly challenged with your own journey in terms of fertility, and actually the own personal kind of trauma of like, should I, shouldn't I, does it matter if I don't, will never have, had suffered miscarriages as well as experiences through that, and I hated Mother's Day. I hated the idea of this sense of universality about how Mother's Day should be seen. Mm-hmm. It was almost like everyone should love Mother's Day, and if you weren't, you were literally the devil. And I hated that. I hated that sense of you had to conform. I am now mum. I'm a mum to 13-year-old twins. I'm very grateful for that, even on the tough days when being a mum to teenagers is quite challenging. Mother's Day has changed in that time as well. But I'm perhaps also slightly squeezed that I'm cherishing those few years that I'm going to have with my mum, who hasn't been, you get squeezed between your kids and your elderly parents. So I think it's amazing that one day can create so many different thoughts and memories and emotions in an individual.
Yeah. There are many, Michelle.
Yeah, it's like the build-up, isn't it, I think, as well. Like the build-up to it, and then you start to see the cards in the shops, and you're like, great, awesome, and then it goes on. So for me, actually, I honestly never feared Mother's Day for me. I feared Mother's Day for my best friend who was going through her IVF journey, and that was really, really difficult. So I would do this weird thing where we'd walk into a shop, and I'd be like, absolutely nothing to see there. Don't look that way. And so there would be those moments where I'd be nervous for her and aware that I would be doing something on that particular Sunday which was quite contrived and, you know, for the photo op of, you know, and it was nice in that moment, but knowing how hard that would feel for her and how heartbreaking that would be for her. And it's not just because I'm a particularly good friend, although of course I am, but she is like my sister and we're both only children, so it was very, very poignant for us. And then actually this year my mum is really super unwell and it's really hard, and as soon as it starts coming out you're a bit choked by the thought of what it should be. And so I think that whilst we all are very, very aware of what it's like to open your phone and flick through those like mummies who are having like breakfast in bed and the beautiful artwork and the bouquet of flowers and the everything, there are women who are doing it alone. We read so many like posts on Peanut about women who are like, you know, the father of my kids didn't even give them £1 to get me a card, or, you know, I'm dreading it because, you know, I'm mum and dad and everything else in between, or, you know, I don't have my mum, or I've suffered loss, or whatever it might be. And so I think there is just this temptation to look at things, and it does change. Your association with it does change as life goes on. And it's okay to not like the day. Mm-hmm. But it's also okay to like it at one period of time and then not like it in another.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've never really liked it because I never got on with my mum. I think she wanted to love me. I mean, she's dead, but I don't think she knew, and I'd love to ask her questions about it. I don't think she actually knew how to love me properly, and that wasn't her fault. I think it's just a generational thing where I don't know her journey because I didn't ask her in time, but... So I always looked at people with their mums, and I was like, oh my God, you really like each other. Like, wow, like you really hang out with each other and you like each other. And for me, that was so alien because my mum never told me she loved me. She never kissed me, but I don't think it was her fault. I mean, she was desperately depressed. So there's no anger there. There's just a curiosity of how this actually manifests itself from your own parenting. And then maybe she wasn't told she was loved or kissed often, you know. So I find that very sad, and I see people with their mums, and I'm always like, oh my God, I'd love that with my mum. And I just ask people about their relationships. I find it fascinating. So I've never really liked the day anyway. And then I was having, you know, obviously the baby loss and the infertility, so then it was an even greater sort of like a pushback on this day that comes up, and you, as you said, you walk into a store and you cannot escape it. And for me, I'd like it scrapped, but because it just conjures up all of these things all the time. And then, you know, I realized maybe 3 years ago that I was creating the Instagram post without thinking about, you shouldn't not post about your beautiful family, because then you're saying it's us against them. But it is very triggering, and it is that point about, do you post, do you not post, do you celebrate, do you buy the cards, do you keep it under wraps? You know, so I always tell my husband, just forget it, we'll just have a normal breakfast. You know, I'm sure the kids find it super weird. But it is that whole point about, do we keep these days going with the way the world is turning and the way we are understanding more about how you are triggering other people? I mean, Izzy, do you think, as someone who posts about your children, I love your post to death, but do you think as a Mother's Day post, it is still this day that we should be making a big effort for?
Yeah, so I was saying earlier about how I actually trained to be a violinist. That's my background. I never really thought, if you had asked me all those years ago when I was studying to be a musician, that I would be doing whatever it is that I do on Instagram. But, you know, there are certain days that I dread a bit on Instagram, because I'm like, how do you manage this? International Women's Day, another day, where you see all these posts and which are wonderful, but equally I'm like, what do I have to say of kind of importance towards this, or who am I even to be the person to sort of write about this, or and with Mother's Day, because I'm so acutely aware of that feeling. So my husband's in the public eye, he's in a band, and when I did finally fall pregnant with Lola, they approached to ask if we wanted to celebrate our pregnancy in Hello, and I just remember going, well, the only way I'm going to do this is to be completely truthful about what we've been through, and it was just amazing the response that came back from opening up about what we've been through. And similarly, I think when days like this happen on Instagram, like Mother's Day, I just always try to honour that person that would have struggled and what would I have wanted to see. And a lot of people that I've connected with through Instagram, they find a lot of hope, and I actually find that enormously like a warmth from that they find hope from it. So I try to always respect that person who I was, when
you were going, when you're going through it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, do you celebrate Mother's Day now, Nishma?
Oh yeah, I do. Well, I do. Yeah, I think it was something that it's one of those weird things. I probably longed for it for so long, and then I probably made it into a bit too much of an occasion, and now it's just a bit embarrassing because you've got to kind of scale back. But I actually think it's funny. I have that same anxiety because you're like, should you, shouldn't you? And you want to kind of share your own little rituals with the world. But it's funny, isn't it? Marketing. I don't know if you all get this. You get the emails now that say, "Would you like to opt out of Mother's Day?" And you kind of feel like I'd like to be able to opt out of it more than just an email that comes to me, And you can't, and that's part of the challenge. But I wonder if there's an opportunity, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and you see it more and more. I think Mother's Day has to be reframed.
Yeah.
I think it has to change in terms of, actually, is it an opportunity, not to kind of shout about my rituals and how I want to celebrate it, but actually, to your point, to give space and opportunity to the breadth, so that no one has to feel embarrassed. And actually, if we could just change Mother's Day into a little space for everyone.
And then how do you see that happening? I know you can't do it off the cuff right now, but in terms of how you would change a day that is called Mother's Day and is about celebrating motherhood.
Well, I think that's the thing is, I think there is an opportunity to even frame that sense of motherhood of it being a choice, for those that choose not to, rather than it being. I almost kind of feel like if you took the label away, you're actually kind of giving agency to those that have almost tried to create the division and the politics around it. I think it's almost like, I'm not saying this is a really crap ad idea, I shouldn't give someone who's in marketing, but do you remember there was a period, I think it was, after George Floyd, and they had all these little black squares on Instagram, and it was, to make a point. I'd want something that was almost kind of a blank space, to give that real push of a suggestion that Mother's Day is whatever people define it to be. To kind of almost, you kind of got to go far to one side to actually, for those that hadn't even considered that there is a breadth of opinions and choice around it, that you want to neutralise it to then kind of almost let something flourish in its space that just forced a conversation.
Yes.
I think the challenge is to reframe something that is very Hallmark cards and flowers, and there's a whole industry that now lives around Mother's Day. It's actually quite hard to move it on. I don't think you kill it. I think you completely suppress it and change it. Because I think then it gives room to everyone. It gives room to me that I will like... it's probably a little bit too much pressure on Mother's Day now, but in a fun way, my kid's older. But I remember those years when I hated myself for the fact that I was so jealous of my friends who were going, oh, look at me on Mother's Day, and I hated myself for it. I didn't hate them, I hated me. And I still remember that feeling when I'm, happy with my kids and doing what I'm doing. I don't forget that.
That there are others out there.
Totally.
And Michelle, that's what your new campaign is dealing with now, isn't it? The peanut campaign. Have you seen it? Have you seen the peanut campaign around London? And is it national?
It's around London.
It's around London.
Yep.
So if you could tell us a bit more, because I've seen some of the billboards and posters, and it's
Yeah.
super effective.
Yeah, it's basically, I suppose it's a little bit about what you're saying, which is kind of Mother's Day, we have an opportunity to tell lots of different women's stories. And that can be motherhood from the angle of the woman who is a mum and struggling with motherhood. That can be the story of a woman who desperately wants to be a mum and isn't there yet. That can be the story of a woman who has lost her mum. There are so many stories of women that we can tell, and we're very fortunate at Peanut that women are sharing those stories with one another every day, and we get to see what they care about, and we get to see where they hurt or where they feel angry or shame or whatever it might be, and we have the ability to tell their story for them. So it's about taking that platform and saying, okay, well, we have that voice that you maybe don't have, and we can tell your story for you, and we can support you. And so you know, a beautiful like depiction of women's stories by the brilliant Peanut team, because it is it's on us to do that, right? We actually have a unique position where, of course, like there are other brands who can't do it. They can't tell that story because it's either not authentic, or they don't have the real stories, so they're kind of borrowing them, or because it's their industry to sell the bloody flowers, or to, you know, get everyone to feel the pressure to have the cake or the breakfast in bed. But that's not what we do. All we have to do is make sure that every woman feels like her story is legitimate and her voice is legitimate, and we can kind of give it a microphone. And so we did it around the streets of London, and it's honestly, it's one of my favourite things that the team have done. It's amazing.
What's the main feedback been? So what are the main points that people have come up, maybe not even with your campaign now, but in previous years?
Yeah.
What are the main pointing areas of this is why it makes me feel uncomfortable, Mother's Day?
Honestly, it's a lot to do with women who don't have the Instagram Mother's Day that they are seeing, because they have the jealousy that they're not part of that, or because literally their life didn't permit them to have that right now, right? They haven't got a partner who can't wait to like get the cards in or whatever, because it's just another day where they have to get up at 5 a.m. and do everything, or whatever that, you know, that might be, or because they've got postpartum depression and they've got the flowers and they've got the baby and they've got the perfect life and they don't feel anything at all. Actually, what they feel is cold, and they don't know why. So all of those stories, and they're all such important stories that for us to be able to tell. And, you know, there is this opportunity to reframe it, because obviously Peanut's vision is always going to be about amplifying women's stories, but there are also stories to be told on Mother's Day that aren't about women, and that's also important too. You know, if you've had loss, you've had loss, and Mother's Day will mean something to you because of that, for example. So obviously our angle is very specific. We're always going to be about how do we better amplify what women have to say and make them feel heard. But there are other parts to the Mother's Day story as well, I think, that other brands can and other platforms can help amplify.
And what about, I don't know if you found it when your family may not understand that you don't want to celebrate Mother's Day. So then it's that whole thing about how do you explain to children or friends or relatives that this isn't something that you want to celebrate.
Particularly seems to be to make you the things with the stuck on tissue paper that's like, you know, or always with bits of pasta that fall off.
But that's another thing too, is that in schools or with peer groups, there needs to be more of an explanation that, you know, maybe those kids at school don't have a mum, but the teacher's still doing this group class to make, you know, there's not that much understanding, I think, in the outside world if you haven't experienced it.
I totally agree with that. And also there is this element of, like, I have friends who do not want to have children.
Yeah.
They don't want it to have children, and they're good with that, and we're all cool, and that's great. And for them, it's like Mother's Day, you know. That's a pressure for them with their own parents or whatever it might be. I don't know. There is a. It makes everyone feel a bit more comfortable to have this day, maybe. And
do you think, what makes you say that?
I think we
Why
like to.
comfortable?
Honestly, I think we like to punctuate the year. And Mother's Day means nearly spring. And then we're nearly at Easter, and then we're nearly, right? And I think we just like to punctuate the year.
Yeah, I think it's very much I think that's the thing. If anyone had kind of stopped and said, why do we do this? Like, where did it come from? Where's it been manufactured? And
Where did it come from, by the way? We should have researched
I feel like
that
I should have
before.
Googled that
Cat
before I
knows.
came out.
I was just
Oh,
about to
it's the
say,
church.
it's a Christian Mothering
Is it?
Sunday, isn't it?
Mothering Sunday, yeah.
Return to their mother church, but obviously nobody has one now.
Yeah.
Hallmark. Yeah, they just took it on. But I think the other thing is from an education point of view. So, look, it's like we should be challenging things and not just accepting them. Mm-hmm. It's number one, both in terms of Hallmark's presence of these days. But I think, if I reflect on that, and actually it's my kids said to me, but, so-and-so's got 2 dads.
Yeah.
So what do
Oh,
they
my
do?
goodness,
What do they
right.
make?
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing is that the prevalence of the breadth of stories of motherhood or not motherhood or whatever it may be doesn't exist in children's literature. So they are brought up and all the stories they read, and there are some changes in there but not enough, that they already are ingrained with this idea. So to your point, actually, when they want to come home and celebrate and you don't, they don't understand it because they're not seeing anything else.
Yeah.
And therefore, almost as much as we progress in other aspects of society, when we don't fix some of the root challenges that I think exist, you create this friction. Yeah, because then also they start to go, well, maybe that is wrong, even though they don't think something's wrong, because all of a sudden it doesn't fit neatly into spaces. I mean, it's amazing that there hasn't been more challenge, that this is one of the first few conversations I've had ever about Mother's Day. Like, why is it not a bigger part of the editorial agenda? And it's back into this, we are still uncomfortable with this idea of liberation and choice and judgment that exists around anything to do with women.
Oh, I'm sure Michelle has something
Don't
to...
get me started.
Yeah, I was going to say, you probably have a point with that, Michelle, that we'd like to hear.
I just feel that, from the moment, I think we fetishize fertility in a very bizarre way, and it's only when you really step back and think about it that you really understand that it's happening. Because a young woman, even I've just done it, a young girl gets her first period and everyone's like, hooray, she's a woman. No, she's like a young girl who's in puberty, right? And is going through adolescence. And so from that moment, we kind of fetishize the idea that she has the potential to bear a child. Wow. And we kind of really obsess over that. And it's why I think we have, as a society, such a problem with menopause, because menopause is the end of that period. And therefore, I feel like we can't have that conversation and everything comes a bit awkward, because all of a sudden that's the end of something. Rather than the closing of that chapter and the start of another, we see it as the end. She's not fertile anymore, and therefore that's not something that we glamorize, and then we don't start to glamorize women again until they're in their later life, and then it's like, oh, you're like Helen Mirren, and and they're the only ages of women that we really kind of admire, and we don't look at anything in between. There's something so bizarrely wrong and oppressive about it that I find it suffocating, because it all really links back to fertility.
Yeah.
And you're always running out of time. Doesn't matter which end. I'm in the other end now. I'm deeply into my perimenopausal stage. But I feel like, you get your period, and then it's like, who's got the period? Then you spend your years of trying not to get pregnant, then you've got to get pregnant, and you shouldn't do it by that time, then it's by that time, and then it's like, there's this horrific clock.
It's that pressure and that.
And I'm rubbish with that idea of forced, deadlines and time, and squeeze your life into pockets, and it's horrible.
We get it from, as you said, the very first stages. It starts, and then you feel the pressure on yourself, or it's all around you. If you're not feeling the pressure, it's being put on you. To conceive, to be motherly, to have the Mother's Day, and then it's sort of endless, and then it happens with the next generation or generation of people And Izzy, when you were going through all of your challenges, did you have a support system around you that helped you through the Mother's Day, or was it literally you and your husband trying to sort of go into a bunker and say, let's get this day over with and let's get through it?
So I think I was pretty much hibernating
Were you?
through my fertility struggles. Firstly, the medication I was on made me feel so awful. I felt bloated and uncomfortable and just low. Just, you know, probably in hindsight, I was depressed, really. I just didn't want to go out, because if I went out, that would mean someone would say, "Oh, so you think of having children?" You know, every time I wore some dungarees, and this guy said, "Oh, you're pregnant." I was like, "Oh,
No, I'm
God,
just
the
really
ground
fashionable and
just
chic. Yeah.
swallow me up." And I think he wanted the ground to swallow him up as well. But it was, I didn't talk about it. I just didn't talk about it, because all my friends around me were getting pregnant. Everybody that I passed on my high street were pregnant or pushing a buggy. That's what it felt like to me. It's like when you're going to get a car, and then it's the only car you see. It's just,
it's true.
It just gets into your psyche. So I don't think really I talked about it enough to allow the people close to me to be a support network.
Have you told them since?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken about it openly a lot more. I mean, one of my things that I found difficult was I'm one of four. My oldest brother, Rupert, had a very serious car accident when he was 17, and he's brain damaged. And my mum and dad have gone through unbelievable grief through that process, even though he's still here. It's been a tragedy for our family. And I desperately wanted to give my mum happiness. I kind of thought that by me having a grandchild would bring her happiness. And after my miscarriage, I said to Mum, you know, I just so wanted it. I so wanted to do this for you. And Mum said, "Oh, Izzy, all I want is for you to be happy. If you were sitting here now saying you don't want children," she's like, that's all that matters to me is your happiness. And it was just this moment of realization that all the pressures was my own pressures. It was the thoughts that were going on in my head, and that sense of failure was my own beliefs.
Yeah.
And by talking and communicating with others, helped relieve that pressure. And so I wish I had reached out to my support network more.
You'd have to answer my next question. It's just something I'm thinking of about Rupert and your mum's relationship. So when this happened to Rupert at 17, you'd have to answer. How was your mum around Mother's Day, and you guys all wanted to celebrate, but then Rupert was having these challenges from the car accident? Did you notice anything at the time, or maybe you were too young?
I think, actually, I mean, I was 12, and I think children are much more aware than we realise. I remember picking up vibes, and actually, one of my biggest things now is that I feel like I'm not being told something, a fear that there's something big happening and I'm being protected. And that's just a mother's instinct, isn't it? You want to protect, or your dad's instinct. You just want to protect your child. But now I have this thing of something bad's going to happen. So I think my mum and my dad, but you know, particularly since having children of my own, I see a lot of likeness between my son and my brother. And it's only since having my own children, actually, that I feel that pain for my mum for what she's been through on a very different level to how I understood it before. I can't imagine.
So then maybe, I know you're talking about triggers, but maybe Mother's Day sometimes is a good thing when there's been such a moment in a family, and we're all so busy all the time, and we're always doing things, and maybe ignore me because I hate the day, but maybe there are moments when actually Mother's Day is a good thing, because then we stop and you really tell this person how great you think they are, or what a great job they've done, and maybe that doesn't happen for 364 days of the year. So I mean, I'm not saying it's a terrible day for all, it's just, I think because if we go to social media for a second, because obviously it is the biggest point, I think, if you're on social media, particularly Instagram, where you are going to be triggered, more so than in a shop, when you can just quickly go to the grocery aisle and just ignore that display. How do you think the whole sort of bonanza on social media, particularly Instagram, should it change? Do we just say it's not us against them, let everyone do what they've got to do? Or should there be a point where people, should be far more aware of how their posts and how what they're saying does affect other people? Michelle, what do you think? It's a tricky one.
Such a difficult one. Honestly, I think that the answer to that is that everyone has to control their social media use, or use with caution, right? And that means that if you know that there is potentially going to be stuff that you don't want to see, don't use it on that
Switch
day.
off for a while, yeah.
and kind of give yourself permission to go and be somewhere else and do something else and engage with other content. I remember a long time ago someone saying that they use Instagram like a magazine, right? And they look at the stuff that they want to read, and if they don't want to read it, they move past it. And it's a bit like that. Don't open the magazine that day, and kind of move on and do something that does bring you happiness and joy and does give you that good feeling rather than that negative feeling. But I think that there is just this general awareness of the questions, the comments, the interactions that other people can have with you, that can be the thing that doesn't have to be a social media trigger, that can just be an interaction that is more difficult to avoid. No one can necessarily dodge all of those. And so I think that can be hard. But honestly, I think it's like a use with caution. And if in doubt, you wouldn't go and put yourself on a day that you were already feeling pain. You wouldn't go and put yourself in a ring of fire. So try not to do that.
The people that I speak to, though, often do put themselves in that ring of fire.
Of course, because
it's a terrible habit.
No, and sometimes because you have that nature of like you're hurting, so I'll just make it.
Oh my
I'll just
God.
go to
worse.
punish myself even more.
Yeah.
I wonder if, I think there is a role, it doesn't exist, but there should be, and I hope it gets developed, is, I always think there should be filters, and that same way you can opt out of an email, is to be able to, because there's so much.
You need to get on Peanut, mate.
I know.
We've got loads of filters on there.
It's almost kind of get people, as you say, I do think you have to, you've got to be selective about when and how you use social media. You can curate your feed. I certainly remember in those years when I talked about, actually wanting just to hide away from Mother's Day because I was struggling with getting pregnant and having children. Social media wasn't prevalent then.
Yeah.
So I didn't have that. And I definitely would have been the kind of person who sorted it out, even though I know I shouldn't have done, because you just, you've stalked the ex-boyfriend, you're going to do that. So it's that. But I think, therefore, there's got to be a sense of, there's two things. One, yes, you can encourage people to switch off, do something different. Yeah. But I also think there needs to be more Peanut. There needs to be more of a flood of information that allows choice. Yeah. I think the challenge is that you can't curate your feed, you can't control it in a way that allows you to look at something else. And I think there's a big part of, if you are bombarded with certain messages, whatever it might be, we can get obsessed about the news and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Your mind is conditioned to think about things in a certain way. Yeah. And actually, I think when you're feeling all those feelings about motherhood, whatever it might be, you will naturally seek it out if there's no other option. And I think that's the challenge, is there isn't enough breadth. And actually, we were talking earlier, and I was saying there's not enough humour. There's not enough humour around this conversation. Humour has got me through some of the deepest and darkest challenges that I have. And there's no humour. There's no funny memes about, the shit that happens to you when you're trying to have kids or not have kids. Yeah. So when there's a lack of content and humour and honesty and humanity around it, sadly, you're forced with kind of, there or nothing, and that's not enough.
Yeah. But it is that thing, if we're thinking about, if you're in a certain position, like when I was trying to get pregnant, and I just always had this thing, and I did see a healer about it, because the two things that I wanted to control was my envy and my anger, because they were directed to other people. I'm not a saint. Oh my God, I got super about some people, but they're the two things I really wanted to control, because I could be depressed, I could be longing, I could be whatever, but I didn't want to then look at someone and feel hatred or envy to them, you know, because then you're causing a whole wave of other emotions that actually are so negative in already a pretty trying situation as it is. So for me, it was like, just on a personal note, it was, because I see a lot of these things on Instagram now, and, oh, Sharon's put up, you know, as in like Sharon they don't know, put up her scan picture, well, good for you, Sharon. And I'm just sort of sitting there thinking, well, that's just anger. Like what? And also it's encouraging a cult-like following, if you will, because then you're getting other ladies who are going through what many of us in the room have gone through, and pulling them into your way of thinking, yes, Sharon, why are you putting your scan picture up? But actually, Sharon's tried for 10 years. So damn right you put your scan picture up. Good for you, lady. You know, and I've seen so much of it recently that's really starting to affect me, because there's a lot of, why is she doing this? And, oh, you two had sex once. Good for you guys. And I'm just seeing all the, yeah, you tell them. And I'm just going, oh my God, what? Like, you are just, as you were saying earlier about conditioning the mind, all of this behavior, particularly on Instagram, is just causing these pretty, because I was definitely impressionable, these impressionable people to go, I'm going to get angry too. And I just find this like jaw-dropping, actually.
I mean, we actually, we do have filters. I was being a bit funny, but we actually do. On Peanut, for that very reason, because if you don't want to see a scan, then we'll enable you to not see the scan.
How do you do that?
So we have tags effectively, and the tags work by tagging content. You can either tag it or the system will tag it, and then you can opt in or out to see certain content. So, and that is important, because you're absolutely right. If you've been trying for 10 years and you get your moment and you get your positive pee stick, the first thing you want to do is tell people you've got a positive pee stick. But the challenge therefore is you don't want to do it in the community that you've just been kind of sharing and supporting each other through that journey. Actually, the right place to share that is with all the other women who want to share their positive pee stick. So there is an ability, but it's actually why we need more products being built by women who have that empathetic product view, so that when we're building a product, we can think, actually, that might be triggering to some people, and it's not just good for the clickbait the algorithm to show more, because it doesn't matter whether the reaction is good or bad, it just matters that there's an intense reaction. Actually, that's not what we're trying to build on our platform. It's much more around, I don't want you to have extreme either way reactions, I just want you to feel good and supported. So I think it's a good argument for why for certain things that happen in our lives, for certain life stages, you do want an empathetic product, and the product to have been built by people who understand that triggering isn't just a trigger in the sense of, I don't like Mother's Day, for example. The trigger can be much deeper and have much further reaching consequences, including, I also feel angry and hate you. And we don't want that. We know what that cause is. We've all seen those products. We use them, and we know the consequence of it.
What do you mean?
So well, we know the consequence of the
anger and the hatred and the
echo chambers. Yeah.
Also, I think just listening to you talking about when you finally get that positive result and you've been struggling, but equally, motherhood post-fertility struggles and the guilt around finding it difficult, or
Like you're not
moving
allowed to.
on, and almost having to sort of get over what's just happened. And certainly for me, my whole pregnancy with Lola, it was not an enjoyable. I was terrified until she arrived, and then I just became more terrified about what I had to do next, because I hadn't even thought about what motherhood was, because it was so far from my thinking for so long that all of a sudden you're then home as a mother, grieving kind of everything you've just been through. And there's not actually that much out there.
And then you have to be so grateful.
So grateful.
So you
all the time.
can't then
and then
say,
people
this is
say,
really
do
hard.
you think that you are a different mother because of the way your daughter was conceived? And I think, that always, for some reason, for me, that I found that really jarring. Like, in some way, she is more precious, or I'm more precious because of the way. And actually, whatever way a baby comes to this world, they are your everything. Even though, of course, if you've been through trauma, of course, but I don't know, I felt like, and now she's here, and I'm still having to be, grateful and continue living that kind of narrative.
Yeah. And you can't ever say, actually, it also sucks for me too, right? So, and I'm also bored or whatever else it is. Yeah.
And then, again, Michelle, you don't have to answer this question, but you just touched on your mother not being well right now. So maybe this Mother's Day has a whole new meaning to you than all the other ones.
Yeah, it's a really, strange thing, because I was just saying to Izzy, actually, on the way here, or the way up, or down, I did have 4 mums to think about on Mother's Day, because I have a stepmom and my husband has a stepmom and a mum, and then his mum passed a couple of years ago, and that was quite a big loss. But for me, I'm still thinking about Mother's Day being, how does my stepmom feel? She doesn't have children of her own. And I'm always trying to think about how those people feel on that day. This year, yeah, it's really hard with Mum. I don't know whether I'll be able to see her. I don't know if she's well enough. I don't know, actually, how it's going to be this year, and it's playing it by ear, and that's a weird thing, because always, actually, the pressure of can I book a restaurant that we can all go to, or whatever, and my kid's going to behave, or whatever it is, and I literally kill for that now, and now I don't know what it's going to look like. So yeah, I think it is hard this year. I definitely, sorry to my stepmom and stepmother-in-law, but I definitely care much less about their feelings this year, because the only thing I can think about is Mum, and getting her through this so that we get to do something next year. It's all of those things, and the guilt I feel for the wasted Mother's Days where I didn't see her, or
it does have
and so that and there's a lot of that stuff. So yeah, I think it will be a weird one this year.
I'm going to ask you another personal question, which you never have to answer these things. When you were growing up, were you close to your stepmother?
Actually, I didn't have. My dad met my stepmom when I was in my 20s.
Okay, so were you conscious of the fact that your stepmother wanted children? It didn't.
No,
and then did you then celebrate her equally, or did you not? Or
I didn't know her during that life, so I was an adult, and that her and my dad were never going to have children. Just that was not because they would have children, but the thought of my. Anyway, so they were later life, so that was never going to be a thing in that way. But yes, I've always been very aware of her feelings.
Do you celebrate her or send
always,
her a card?
Always flowers, always, and also for my husband's stepmom, which he never did actually. When I met him, I would always send her flowers too, because do you know what? Maybe it's because I'm a stepmom, and maybe that's why. Because my husband has kids, and maybe that's why I'm always just very aware of how that feels, and that's also quite a different kind of role, right?
Because you can.
Wow, I've just had that epiphany on this stage. That's why I empathise with them. But no, I think that's why. Yeah.
Because you can have motherhood in so many different ways. As we all know, friendship. Pets, friends, adoptive mothers, as in maybe not legally, but you become very close to somebody. And then it can take on a whole new meaning in that way as well. Have you had experiences when you have brought somebody in on this to this Mother's Day that wasn't your biological mother?
I definitely think there have been women that have and mothers that have come into my life at certain points and have been huge influence on me. My best friend's mum was very much around actually when Roo had his accident to help with pickups and all those kind of things. And so yeah, definitely. I personally feel like I've met lots of mothers.
Mother figures,
but I'm lucky. I have a very close relationship with my mum, and actually I'm grateful, Michelle, for you to talk how you have, because it's made me think, actually, am I doing enough to appreciate, not worry about the kids' behaviour.
Go to the restaurant,
and
eat the food, let them throw the food. I think that's stuff that I wish I'd not been so stressed about, for sure.
Oh my God, right. So I think now that my mum is dead, you say, oh my God, I could have driven down 4 more times than I did to see her, or I could have phoned her 5 more times a month than I did. And I would just say to anybody who is either close or distant to their mother or parents, but we're talking about mothers this evening, is that I tell everyone, oh my God, please give them more time. Please give them more time, because I didn't get, oh my God, I've got to call my mum. Okay, bye. And then I'd go out for the evening, and now I look back and I go, sugar, how did she feel sitting there, because she was on her own? And what could 25 more minutes have meant to somebody on their own? It's so, and this is happening everywhere. Or your mum and dad are still together, but the dad is a nice guy, but maybe not asking her so many questions about herself. I think there can be so much more sort of, not on just Mother's Day, but emphasis put on time with people, mother figures, mothers. I'm just such a
and time with your own children.
And
as
time with
well.
your own children.
Yeah. I'm feeling it now with. So I've got boy-girl twins, and everyone warns you about it, but you don't really realise it. Is, of course, as they get older, they're more absorbed, and I can feel my daughter drifting off, and she's hiding in her bedroom, because that's what she wants to do. And it's the first time I've had, in the last 6 months, I've had that real I'm losing them. And you're not losing them, obviously, but, you tell yourself all these terrible stories. But it was, I think for me, because you do also reevaluate your own relationship with your parents and that, and I've been through similar, those moments of I didn't spend enough time, and I should have done, and I've tried to make up for it, and there's always an endless amount of guilt involved, and I don't know how many more years we'll have with mum, and so we really make that moment of appreciation. But it's made more acute when I reflect now of how I feel with my children, knowing that, they're going to do that thing. Yeah, mum, yeah. I can see them doing it now. I'm like, they hang on your every word when they're tiny, and all of a sudden you're not the centre of your universe. And it's completely made me rethink both my relationship with my children, but also my relationship with my mother.
Yeah.
And actually recognising, where you need to, I don't want them to adopt all the guilt that I did around my parents, but I also want them to recognise that appreciation doesn't have to be just on one day. It's okay to have a special day, but actually it's that habit forming, encourage and enjoy the constant conversations and checking in and all those things.
Yes, it's really
that thing about what's the most generous thing you can ever do is be generous with your time. Yeah. I think that is...
And maybe it's, we're saying what can we do, because it's going to be impossible to just scrap Mother's Day, but I'm sort of sitting here thinking, but maybe it's the day that I take the opportunity to talk to my children about being a mother, and what about my mum, and just start that kind of conversation of an awareness of why that person, or whoever that is, even if it's perhaps not your mum because, they're not around or you don't have that relationship, but whether there's somebody that has made you feel secure and safe, and you talk to them about.
I also wish they hadn't put International Women's Day so close to Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Don't you find that really?
Well, do you know what's a right bugger is my mum's birthday's on International Women's Day. It's like a double whammy.
Compacted in the first 1 month.
It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think that idea of reframing Mother's Day as a day of appreciation and awareness is a wonderful way to give everyone space in that.
Well, which one of us here is the senior marketing director at Google? Hello.
Who is that?
Thank you so much for coming down, and thank you for coming down. And, well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.